What's up, history rebels and future scholars? It's your host, Lo-Fi Dreams, back at you with another epic saga ripped straight from the pages of rebellion and revolution. Welcome to our deep dive into the American Revolution. We're not just talking tea parties and powdered wigs, folks. We're talking grit, guts, and the sheer audacity of a fledgling nation staring down the barrel of an empire's might. How did they do it? How did a patchwork of colonies armed with conviction and not much else take on the redcoats and win? This is the story of long odds, high stakes, and a world turned upside down. Today, we'll uncover how 13 colonies managed to defeat the world's most powerful empire. This isn't just a story of battles won and lost. It's a testament to the human spirit, the power of an idea, and yeah, a little bit of luck and a whole lot of strategic genius, and maybe some blunders on the other side. We're gonna peel back the layers of myth and legend, look at the hard facts, the turning points, the moments where everything hung in the balance. From the streets of Boston to the fields of Yorktown, this was a fight for the ages, a true David versus Goliath showdown that echoes through time. So grab your tri-corner hats, metaphorically speaking, of course, unless you're really into historical cosplay, which, hey, no judgment here. We're about to embark on a journey through the smoke and fire, the triumphs and tribulations, of a revolution that didn't just change a nation, it changed the world. Get ready to understand the how, the why, and the woe they actually pulled that off of the American fight for independence. It's a tale of defiance, endurance, and the birth of something entirely new. Let's get into it. Alright, let's set the stage. Act 1. The Empire strikes. Arrogantly? See, the British, they walked onto this continent like they owned the place. Well, technically they kinda did, but they severely underestimated the fire in the bellies of the colonists. A bunch of farmers, they scoffed. How hard can it be to quell this little rebellion? This wasn't just confidence, it was a blinding hubris, a fatal flaw in their imperial script, you see. They figured a show of force, a few swift victories, and these upstarts would scurry back to their plows, hats in hand, begging forgiveness from the crown. But the American spirit? It wasn't written in their playbook, not a chapter they'd read. They couldn't comprehend the depth of the desire for self-determination, for a voice, for liberty. This miscalculation, this sheer dismissal of colonial resolve, folks, it was strike one for the empire. Now imagine you're trying to run a war, a major war, from 3,000 miles across the vast and stormy Atlantic Ocean. In the 18th century, no less. No emails, no instant communication, no swift cargo planes, just slow-sailing ships at the mercy of the wind and waves. Every musket, every cannonball, every barrel of gunpowder, every biscuit for a hungry soldier had to make that perilous, months-long journey. Think about the logistics, the sheer organizational nightmare of it all. Orders from London, strategic directives from Parliament took weeks, sometimes months to reach commanders in the field. By the time those orders arrived, the situation on the ground could have completely, drastically changed. This vast distance created a lag, a critical disconnect that the colonists, fighting on their own familiar turf, could, and most certainly did, exploit to their advantage time and time again. The empire's reach, so mighty on paper, was stretched incredibly, dangerously thin across that ocean. And let's talk money, honey, because wars, they ain't cheap, not by a long shot. Especially not a prolonged war of attrition, fought thousands of miles far from home base. Britain was already carrying a hefty national debt from previous global conflicts, like the 7 Years' War. Taxpayers back in England, the folks footing the bill, weren't exactly thrilled about funding another endless conflict, especially one against their own kin across the sea, for reasons that seemed increasingly murky and less justifiable. As the war dragged on, year after grueling year, the cost in both British blood and precious treasure mounted relentlessly. The longer the colonists held out, the more stubbornly they resisted, the more expensive it became for the crown. This ever-increasing economic strain started to sow seeds of dissent back in Parliament, weakening the political will to continue the fight, no matter the perceived military might. It became a slow bleed, a financial drain that even a global empire could acutely feel. Enter stage left, not with a flourish but with steadfast resolve, George Washington. Now, he wasn't a military genius in the classic European sense, not at first anyway. He faced setbacks, he lost more battles than he won, especially in the early chaotic days. But what Washington possessed in spades was an unshakable resilience. A quiet charisma that inspired, and the unwavering belief that the American cause was just, that their fight for liberty was righteous and worth any sacrifice. He was the indispensable glue that held the ragtag Continental Army together, through the brutal starvation and disease at Valley Forge, through demoralizing mutinies, through devastating defeats that would break lesser men. He learned on the job, he adapted his strategies, he understood that sometimes mere survival was a form of victory in itself. His ability to inspire loyalty among his weary troops, to compellingly represent the revolution's highest ideals, to simply endure when all seemed lost, when others would have crumbled, that, my friends, was his true superpower. He wasn't just a general, he was a symbol of perseverance, a rallying point for a nation struggling to be born. Now the colonists, they weren't always playing by the established European rules of warfare. No sir, this wasn't solely about lining up in neat, disciplined rows on an open field, trading volleys like gentlemen. Well, sometimes it was, out of necessity, but often, especially with the local militias, it was a different kind of fight. They knew the land intimately, every creek, every dense forest, every hidden mountain path, every swampy morass. They used hit-and-run tactics, sudden ambushes, the element of surprise, what we now call guerrilla warfare. Think of figures like Francis Marion, the swamp fox, leading his men through the Carolina marshes, striking and then vanishing like ghosts. This style of fighting frustrated the heck out of the British regulars, who were trained for conventional set-piece battles on open ground. It was unconventional, ungentlemanly by their rigid standards, but incredibly effective in disrupting British plans and morale. It turned the vast, untamed American landscape from a potential liability into a formidable strategic weapon for the patriots. And speaking of that landscape, fighting on home turf, that's a massive, undeniable advantage, folks. The colonists knew the terrain like the back of their hands, the changing climate, the best places to find food, water, and shelter. They had local populations, albeit sometimes divided in their loyalties, that could provide crucial, timely support intelligence on British troop movements, vital supplies when army stores ran low, and fresh recruits to bolster their ranks. Imagine the British soldiers marching through unfamiliar, often hostile territory, never quite knowing who was a friend or who was a foe among the civilian population they encountered. This local knowledge, this intricate network of support, however informal or decentralized it might have been, was like an invisible army working alongside and sometimes in front of the Continental forces. It meant the rebellion was everywhere and nowhere at once, a constant, simmering, unpredictable threat that the British military machine, powerful as it was, struggled to fully pin down and decisively suppress. The land itself, in many ways, fought for the patriots and against the invaders. All right, picture this. The revolution's dragging on, plot twist after plot twist, the drama intensifying. The colonists are holding on, scrappy and fiercely determined, but they're running on fumes. They need a heavy hitter in their corner. Enter France, stage right, with a centuries-old score to settle with Britain, and a keen eye for geopolitical opportunity. Remember the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, as it was known in America? Yeah, France hadn't forgotten their stinging defeat by Britain. They saw a golden chance to stick it to their old rival, to weaken the British Empire's global grip and prestige. It wasn't just about sweet revenge, though. That was certainly a motivating factor. It was cold, hard, pragmatic geopolitics. A weakened Britain meant a relatively stronger France on the world stage, a shift in the balance of power. The surprising American victory at Saratoga in October 1777 was the proof of concept they needed, the crucial signal that these colonists weren't just a fleeting flash in the pan, they could actually win this thing. So, Benjamin Franklin, working his diplomatic magic, charming the powdered wigs off everyone in Paris, sealed the historic deal. And when France officially signed on the dotted line with the Treaty of Alliance in 1778, it wasn't just a symbolic pat on the back. Oh no, this was the cavalry arriving, quite literally in some cases, bringing tangible, game-changing support. They sent troops, thousands of seasoned, professional soldiers under experienced commanders like the Comte de Rochambeau. They sent ships, a powerful navy under commanders like the Comte de Grasse, ready to challenge the Royal Navy's long-held dominance of the seas, a dominance that was absolutely crucial to British strategy. They sent weapons, muskets, cannons, gunpowder, uniforms, and all the essential sinews of war that the fledgling colonies desperately lacked and struggled to produce on their own in sufficient quantities. This wasn't just a minor boost, it was a fundamental transformation of the Continental Army's capabilities and prospects. Suddenly, Washington had powerful allies with real military firepower, naval strength, and global reach. The game, my friends, had officially, irrevocably changed. But wait, there's more. Wars run on money, vast sums of it, and France opened its treasury to the American cause. Loans, direct financial aid, it flowed across the Atlantic, helping to fund the often bankrupt Continental Congress and keep the American war effort from collapsing under its own crushing debt. And it wasn't just France that eventually got involved. Their entry had a domino effect, internationalizing the conflict. Spain, also eager to chip away at British power, allied with France in 1779, followed by the Netherlands joining the anti-British coalition. This distracted British resources, forcing them to fight on multiple fronts across the globe, in Europe, the Caribbean, India. Suddenly, Britain wasn't just dealing with some rebellious colonists in North America. They were embroiled in a burgeoning world war, stretching their navy and army to the absolute breaking point. This global pressure, largely orchestrated by the French alliance, was a diplomatic and strategic masterstroke, turning a colonial uprising into a multifaceted strategic nightmare for the British Empire. Now, let's talk about the other side of the coin, the flip side of colonial resilience, British missteps. And there were some big ones. You'd think a global empire, the most powerful nation on Earth at the time, would have its act together, right? Coordinated, decisive, efficient, but the British command structure in America, it was a bit of a tangled mess, frankly, a source of constant frustration. You had various generals like Howe, Clinton, Burgoyne, Cornwallis, all capable men in their own right, but often with their own distinct ideas, their own personal ambitions, and frequently, not communicating effectively with each other, or worse, working at cross purposes due to rivalries. Orders from London, formulated by politicians 3,000 miles away, were invariably slow to arrive, and often hopelessly out of touch with the dynamic realities on the ground. This lack of unified command, this internal friction, and sometimes outright jealousy between generals, meant squandered opportunities, uncoordinated campaigns, and a persistent failure to deliver that single, decisive knockout blow they so desperately sought to end the rebellion quickly. It was like a multi-headed hydra, but instead of being fearsome and unstoppable, it often seemed confused and self-sabotaging. The prevailing British military doctrine of the time focused heavily on capturing and holding major cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. Take the urban centers, they thought, and the rebellion will inevitably crumble. And they did capture those cities, often with relative ease, demonstrating their superior conventional military power. But here's the kicker, the crucial misjudgment. America in the 18th century wasn't like Europe with its concentrated populations and centralized power structures. It was vast, decentralized, overwhelmingly agrarian. Capturing a city didn't mean you controlled the sprawling countryside, or more importantly, the hearts and minds, the unwavering will of the people who lived there. The rebellion simply melted away into the hinterlands, living to fight another day, drawing strength, sustenance, and new recruits from the rural population. The Redcoats held the urban centers, yes, but they were often isolated islands in a vast sea of simmering hostility or outright resistance. They controlled the ground they stood on, and often not much else, failing to win the crucial, non-military battle for allegiance and popular support, which, in a revolutionary war, is often the most important battle of all. Then came the much-vaunted Southern strategy, cooked up in the later stages of the war. The idea seemed sound on paper, at least to some strategists in London. They believed there were significantly more loyalists in the Southern colonies, Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, who were just waiting to flock to the king's banner. So they shifted their main military focus southward, aiming to pacify the Southern colonies one by one, then sweep north to crush the remaining resistance. Generals like Cornwallis and Tarleton marched through Georgia and the Carolinas. But instead of rallying widespread loyalist support, their often brutal tactics and those of their loyalist allies alienated even neutral colonists and fueled a vicious, deeply personal, partisan civil war, characterized by atrocities on both sides. Figures like Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan for the Americans, though often losing individual battles, masterfully won the strategic war in the South by attriting Cornwallis's forces and keeping the flame of resistance alive. The Southern campaign, meant to be a decisive masterstroke for the British, turned into a bloody, exhausting quagmire, stretching British resources even thinner and ultimately leading General Cornwallis to a fateful and fatal appointment in a small Virginia tobacco port. So, what truly kept the colonists going through all the immense hardship, the devastating defeats, the long, weary years of war? Ideas, my friends. Powerful, earth-shaking, revolutionary ideas that captured the imagination. The intellectual air was thick with talk of liberty, self-government, representation, natural rights, concepts fired by the Enlightenment and adapted to the American context. And the patriot propagandists? They were absolute masters of their craft, wielding words like weapons. Think of Thomas Paine's electrifying pamphlet Common Sense, and his stirring The American Crisis series, words that literally lit a fire under people. These are the times that try men's souls. That wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a profound call to arms, a moral injunction, a constant reminder of what they were fighting for, not just territory or tax rates, but a new way of life, a republic. This ideological fervor, this deeply held belief in a righteous and noble cause, gave the patriots a spiritual resilience, a staying power that often baffled the more pragmatic British. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their future, their very identity as a free people. Now, holding 13 disparate, often squabbling colonies together, each with its own unique interests, economies, and considerable egos, that, my friends, was a monumental, almost Herculean task. Enter the Continental Congress, our fledgling national government. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. It was often slow, indecisive, plagued by internal divisions and regional jealousies, constantly struggling to raise sufficient money and adequately supply the starving, freezing Continental Army. Let's be real, it was messy democracy in action. But, and this is a very big but, it provided a crucial political center, a visible symbol of colonial unity, however fragile and contested that unity might be. It was the body that took the audacious step of declaring independence, that appointed Washington as commander-in-chief, that skillfully negotiated the vital alliance with France. It gave the rebellion a veneer of legitimacy, a semblance of a functioning national government, which was absolutely essential for both internal cohesion among the states and for securing foreign recognition and aid. Despite all its manifest flaws and frustrations, the Congress was the political engine, sputtering and backfiring at times, but somehow, miraculously, chugging along, keeping the revolutionary dream alive through the darkest of days. Meanwhile, back in Britain, across the wide Atlantic, the public and political mood was steadily souring. This American war was dragging on far longer than anyone had anticipated, costing a king's ransom, and for what exactly? The initial patriotic fervor and confidence in a quick victory had largely faded, replaced by widespread frustration and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, these impossibly stubborn colonists weren't worth the continued trouble and expense. Newspapers back home reported on embarrassing defeats, on the mounting national debt, on the seemingly endless, bloody stalemate. Opposition voices in Parliament grew louder and more critical, vehemently questioning the war's aims, its incompetent conduct, and its spiraling costs. This pervasive war weariness on the British side contrasted sharply with the enduring, if sometimes wavering resolve of a significant portion of the American population who felt they had everything to lose. The colonists were fighting an existential battle for their very existence as a free people. For many in Britain, it was increasingly becoming an expensive, unpopular, and morally ambiguous foreign entanglement. That fundamental difference in motivation, that disparity in will, was absolutely key. And so we arrive at the dramatic climax, the history-altering moment when the world truly seemed to turn upside down, Yorktown. It's the autumn of 1781. Lord Cornwallis, after his bruising, draining campaign through the southern colonies, had maneuvered his substantial British army to Yorktown, Virginia, a small tobacco port on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. He was expecting vital resupply and reinforcement by the mighty Royal Navy, or perhaps even evacuation if the situation deteriorated. He felt relatively secure, dug in behind his fortifications, confidently waiting for the British ships to appear on the horizon. But a storm was brewing, not a literal one, but a perfect strategic storm of Franco-American cooperation that he didn't see coming until it was far too late. General George Washington, ever watchful, ever opportunistic, saw his golden chance for a decisive blow. The Comte de Rochambeau, the astute French commander, was equally eager and ready to commit his forces. The pieces were moving rapidly on the grand chessboard, and Cornwallis, isolated and overconfident, was about to be checkmated, spectacularly and decisively. The first critical move, the linchpin of the entire operation: the French Navy. Admiral de Grasse, sailing north from the West Indies with a powerful fleet of warships, arrived off the Virginia Capes at precisely the right moment, a masterstroke of timing. He decisively engaged and drove off the approaching British relief fleet in the crucial Battle of the Chesapeake, a stunning and pivotal naval victory for the French. This meant Cornwallis was completely cut off from the sea. No supplies, no reinforcements, no escape route. He was trapped. Then, Washington and Rochambeau, in a brilliant feat of rapid strategic maneuver and logistical coordination, marched their combined American and French armies south from the vicinity of New York, covering hundreds of miles with impressive speed, to lay siege to Yorktown by land, completing the encirclement. Imagine Cornwallis's dawning horror as the Franco-American net tightened. Surrounded by enemy forces on land, blockaded by a superior enemy fleet at sea, the Franco-American forces tightened the noose methodically, their cannons and mortars beginning to pound the British defenses relentlessly. The endgame had truly begun. The siege of Yorktown was relentless, a textbook example of 18th century siegecraft, executed with precision and determination. Day by day, the Allied trenches crept closer to the British lines, the artillery bombardment intensified, making the British position untenable. Cornwallis, his situation utterly hopeless, his fortifications crumbling around him, his ammunition low and his men suffering, had no viable choice left. On October 19, 1781, the proud British army, some 8,000 strong, marched out between lines of American and French soldiers and formally laid down their arms. The world watched, or would soon learn, in stunned disbelief. The British military band, legend has it, played the tune "The World Turned Upside Down." While not the literal end of all fighting skirmishes continued for some time, Yorktown was undeniably the death knell for British ambitions in America. When news of the surrender reached London, Lord North, the British Prime Minister, reportedly cried out in despair, "Oh God, it is all over." The political will in Britain to continue the costly and unpopular war evaporated almost overnight. Negotiations for peace began in earnest, leading ultimately to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which formally recognized American independence. The underdog, against all conceivable odds, had won its freedom. And there you have it, folks. The incredible, improbable, a little bit miraculous story of how a band of determined colonies, against all expectations, took on an empire and forged a nation. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the American Revolution. From the hallowed halls of Parliament to the blood-soaked fields of battle, it was a saga of immense courage, unwavering conviction, and yes, a few lucky breaks for the colonists and some serious strategic blunders on the other side. What a ride, huh? This wasn't just a war, it was the birth scream of a new idea of what a nation could be. The fight for independence was a complex, multifaceted tapestry, woven with vibrant threads of brilliant leadership, crucial international alliances, fiery ideological passion, and the sheer unyielding grit of ordinary people doing extraordinary history-making things. It's a story that continues to resonate today, a powerful reminder that even the biggest, most intimidating Goliaths can be toppled by a David with enough heart, a clever strategy, and perhaps a well-aimed stone, or in this particular case, a well-planned siege and a timely naval blockade. If you want to learn more about key battles, foreign aid, or post-war consequences, let us know in the comments. We love hearing what you're curious about. We've only scratched the surface today, of course. There are so many more stories, more unsung heroes, more nuanced details, and complex interpretations to explore in this pivotal moment in world history. But hopefully, this deep dive gives you a clearer, more engaging picture of the how and why behind America's revolutionary victory. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical deep dives. This is Lo-Fi Dreams, signing off. Stay curious, stay revolutionary in your own way, and we'll see you in the next one.